Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my July 2023 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with the nerdy hardcore stats and charts, and then we'll get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you need to skip over something or if you need to go back and go, you know, what was that book that she was talking about? All of that is down below for you. On the way down to the description, if you're not already subscribed, you could do that. You should also probably ring that bell notification so you actually get notified when I upload. In July, I read 16 books for a total of 3,499 pages. That page count figure takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 1,769 of those pages were actually about 59 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 14 adult books and 2 YA books. I read 12 novels, 2 novellas, and 2 graphic novels. This month I read mostly nonfiction and fantasy, followed by horror, science fiction, historical fiction, mystery thriller, and contemporary. If you adjust by page numbers, not much changes. The biggest chunk of these books were from the library, but I reread something I owned, and I read 1 Kindle book. I read 5 audiobooks, 5 paperbacks, 5 hardcovers, and 1 ebook. The biggest chunk of my books were in the 200 to 299 page range, and they were all published since 2020. Most of these books were written by women, and some of the nonfiction didn't have particular protagonists, hence the NA in this graphic. In terms of setting, most of these were set in the US and other worlds, followed by the UK, Canada, China, Qatar, and France. In terms of diversity of subject matter, some were queer, about race, or intersectional, but another third had no discernible diversity to speak of. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 2 3-star reads, 3 3.5-star reads, 7 4-star reads, 1 4.5-star read, and 3 5-star reads. Let's start with our lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? First on this list is a book I had high hopes for, and that's Any Other City. This is a book that was billed to me as a fictional memoir of a musician. Think Daisy Jones and the Six, think the final revival Opal Nev, and this was about a musician, technically. And it was done in an interesting format where it was an A-side and a B-side, the A-side being in the 90s and the B-side being more recently, and the protagonist's memoir was through basically letters and diary entries to the girlfriends that the protagonist had around these time frames. However, this was just a little bit too much sexual content for my ace self. I'm not a prude, I don't mind if there's sex in books, but I would have liked to know going into this that this was just about sex and orgasms and multiple partners and learning how to fist on the page. It would have been nice to know that, and it's nowhere in the synopsis, and yeah, it was a little bit much for me. This also felt like it had a lot more to do with physical art than it had to do with music, and although that's kind of cool too, a lot of that art was also super sexual, and I was just over it. The other 3-star read I had this month was Of the Wild. I also really wanted to like this one, and I did like this one, but it again didn't really live up to my expectations of how much I wanted to like it. This one is a fantasy where we have this main character who, anytime there's a child out in the world who is not loved by the family, this character actually takes them back to their place and raises them as their own. And these children take on these different fantastical qualities. Some will grow big teeth or wings or scales or all of these types of things. However, this main character has the feeling that they are actually dying and they need to find somebody else to take care of their children. Enter someone else who hasn't had a great home life either, and a little bit of a romance ensues. I did enjoy this one, but I wanted more out of it. I either wanted to focus on specific children and the different things that they could do, because there were so many of them that they just seemed like this amorphous amount of children around you, or I wanted to focus more in on this relationship and what that would actually maybe look like, or I wanted to focus in on the threat that they were facing. But although there were enjoyable aspects to this, I don't think it quite came together as much as I wanted it to. On to my 3.5-star reads, the first one being Breathe Like a Badass. This is a book that I picked up for the 75 Hard Challenge, and it's all about mindfulness and meditation and basically telling you why you should do that, except for I don't feel like it actually really told me why I should be meditating. It felt like a lot of just quotes of different people talking about meditation and how it's helped them, which is fine, but I'm still not really sold on the whole practice of it. This month I also read Len and Cub, A Queer History, and this is about two men that lived in New Brunswick in the 1900s, the early 1900s, and we have a lot of photographs of them because one of them was an early photographer. And these photographs showed up in an archive, and somebody pointed out that these two were boyfriends at one point. This book is a history of the area, of their supposed relationship, and just kind of queer culture of that time, and I found that really, really interesting, even though we don't have anything from these two men saying, yes, we were lovers. But I also recognize that it would be dangerous for them to say that, so I understand why we don't, but it is very interesting that we have all of these photographs of them together and the things that can be concluded from them depending on what you know about queer culture of the time. Another nonfiction book I read this month is A Whisper on the Night Wind. This one is about a guy who goes on all of these different adventures around the world. Sometimes he's paddling a canoe from here to there, sometimes he's trekking through this forest or another, and he hears this tale of this creature that was terrorizing people in Newfoundland back in the 1930s, and then also finds all of these other different points in history where something similar was referenced in different texts, so he decides that he's going to go to a very rural place in Newfoundland and see if he can find a creature. Fortunately for this one, he does not go by himself. He actually calls on a friend that he hasn't seen in a very long time, who is very physically fit and actually, weirdly enough, has the time to take off work and from his very pregnant wife to go on this expedition. And they drive to kind of the middle of nowhere, like 31 hours from where they both live. They get in a canoe, they start paddling places, they have to portage, they go to these different areas. And during this time frame, he's also reading all of these primary sources and trying to figure out what this creature could have been. I found this really interesting, and it made me want to go on so many adventures, although not necessarily adventures exactly like this, because I feel like I probably would have injured myself several times over on a trip like this, and maybe would have died in the middle of nowhere, and that's not something I want to do. I am, however, very drawn to the adventure and mystery aspects of this. On to my 4-star reads, the first one being an anthology called Tell Me Pleasant Things About Immortality. This is an anthology of horror stories by one particular author, and there's several different types of horror, and these stories tend to take place either in China or in Canada, and they take place over several different time frames. There's family dynamics, there's gender dynamics, there's murder, there's body horror, there's a lot in here, and I found it a pretty solid anthology. Usually with an anthology it can kind of be a mixed bag, like some you really like and some you don't, but all of these were pretty solid stories to me. This month I also read the graphic novel Light Carries On. This one is about a photographer whose camera is broken, and so he has to get a new camera, although he can't afford a new camera, so he gets an old camera from a shop and then realizes that camera actually comes with a ghost. He and that ghost then have to try to figure out what happened to that ghost. And this is a delightful historical fiction because we're seeing things that happened to the ghost back in, I believe, the 80s, and kind of the queer culture surrounding that. I found it a really interesting tale. It's also part of this trend that I am not necessarily mad at, where an alive person and a person who is deceased kind of form a romantic relationship. Not unlike Cemetery Boys or One Last Stop, which are books that I've obviously enjoyed in the past. Speaking of queer stories, this month I also read Last Call, a true story of love, lust, and murder in queer New York. This one is about the Last Call killer, who was somebody who was killing queer men in the 90s in New York. What I really appreciated about this true crime book is it didn't start with the killer. It started with the first person we know was killed by this killer, and you got to know everything about that person, pretty much leading up to the point where that person disappeared and then was found. And something that is a little bit infuriating about this case is, although we know about 4 or 5 for sure victims, we don't necessarily know if there's any more, because I don't believe the killer ever said anything definitive about there being more victims that he took, but because of the way these victims were found, it can be supposed that he probably had more victims, and that's just terrifying to think of. This also, again, was very interesting to learn about the queer culture of the time frame. Next, on the fantasy side of things, I read The Witch's Heart. This one I didn't know anything about going into, but as you get into it, you learn that it's steeped in Norse mythology. So we have this witch who has the ability to do this certain thing where she can kind of see into the future, and Odin really wants to know how to do that, so she's teaching him, but she's also teaching this power to people that he sees as his rivals. So once he finds that out, he actually kills her in a horrific way. In fact, he burns her body 3 times and takes out her heart, which, you know, just excessive. One day, somebody comes along who you will eventually realize is Loki. It was pretty easy to figure out it was Loki even before we saw his name on the page. And he actually gives her heart back. And she comes back to life and starts living this very quiet existence. And the story goes from there. This is one of those stories that takes place over many, many years, and many things happen. And it just kept pushing forward and forward and forward. And I wanted to know what was going to happen next. And I very much enjoyed that. It's really easy when you have people in one sequestered location for the book to feel like just a collection of short stories that don't really have a purpose, which was kind of the reason why I didn't really like Circe by Madeline Miller, because I was just like, when is this going to end? Whereas this one seemed to have a through line where you actually cared about these characters and how they were developing over time. If you like your mythology stories, this is definitely one to pick up. This month I also read Cosmonauts Volume 2. I obviously can't tell you too much because it's the 2nd volume, but what I can tell you is I really want the 3rd volume to come out, but considering this one just came out this year, I think I'm going to be waiting a while. Cosmonauts is set in this universe where if the planet has a ruling family, like a royal family, they will basically make a tournament so that whoever wins the tournament gets to marry their daughter, so that they basically have control over this company that the royal family owns. And what generally happens is there are mercenaries who are entered into this competition, and those mercenaries work for corporations. So the person who wins the joust won't actually marry the princess, somebody from the corporation will, and it's just a big capitalist takeover type of thing. However, it's much more complicated than that, which is something that is more heavily discussed in the 2nd volume, and I very much appreciated that. Most of the main cast of these books is queer women. Some of them are of color, and there's just this adventure aspect to it, and I very much appreciated it, and I very much enjoyed it, and I think that you should read this series. Penultimately, for my 4 stars, I have The Atlas 6. This is a very long audiobook that I listened to, and I actually have the follow-up to it on my phone right now, and I really need to get to it because, again, that one is also very long. As an audiobook, just as a side note, this one has different voice actors for all the different perspectives, and that's something I always appreciate, so if you do, now you know that. The Atlas 6 takes place in a world that is like our own, but there is definitely magic. Not everybody has it. People are kind of born with the ability to do certain things, and there are different classes of magic. And as we come into this narrative, we find out that there's this place that people who are exceptionally talented at magic basically come together in what's called the Alexandria Society. What's being proposed to these 6 different initiates is these 6 people are going to come together, they are going to learn together for about a year, but one of them will have to be voted out of actually joining the society, and only 5 of them will move forward. Right from the get-go, we have a couple of people that know each other, so there's obviously a little bit of animosity there because they've never been friends, they don't really want to hang out with each other, they've hated being in school together for the past 4 years, and now they have to spend another year of their lives together, which just sucks. And then there's other people that have other capabilities, and it's all this big social game on top of being this game to figure out who is the best and what that actually means, and what they can bring forward to the society and what the society can do for them. But like anything dark academia like this is, there's obviously going to be a twist around the corner. I found this one engaging, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this ends because I'm pretty sure the next book is the completion of the series. I think it's just a duology. I don't think it's a trilogy, although I'll find out, I'm sure, by the end of that book. Finally on my 4-star list is episode 13. This book is about a group of paranormal activity detectors, basically, who have their own TV show. They go to these different haunted locations and trying to figure out if ghosts are real. The 2 people that lead this team are a husband and wife duo. He really believes in ghosts, and she's a physicist, and she's basically there to debunk all of the things that happen in these different locations. This is also done in a found document style thing, so I've heard that the audiobook is excellent, although I read this in print, so it's all their different diary entries or different things that they've caught on camera or different information they've found along the way, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. In this specific episode, they're going somewhere that they are very excited about. It's actually a location that the guy actually mentioned to his future wife on their first date. It's this psychiatrist place where in the 70s, this group of researchers actually disappeared and nobody's heard from them ever since. I really enjoy the dynamics of this because we have these two, we also have a cameraman, we have somebody who's kind of more the back of house type of things. He kind of helps with things, but he's not on screen necessarily all the time. And then we have this woman who's actually a paid actress to be there, and she's kind of the scaredy cat of the bunch, and we get to see her interacting with her family back home because she's really doing this so that she can provide a really good life for her young son, but that obviously means she's spending a lot of time away from him. If you like horror and found footage types of things, this is definitely going to be up your alley. My 4.5 star read this month was I Have Some Questions for You. This one is about a woman who in 1995, when she was a senior in high school, one of her previous roommates in the dorm that she lived in this boarding school actually died. It was found to be murder and somebody was put away. Now she's a grown-up, she has her own podcast, she's got a husband who she's soon divorcing, she's got a couple of kids, and she actually teaches as well. So she's back on this location for something called Minimester, which is a 2-week period where there's basically a mini semester, and she's there to teach podcasting as well as some film history because she's highly skilled and trained in both of these areas. When she's teaching her podcasting class, she asks that the class think of something that they can do on campus, so subject they can cover where they can interview people who are on campus, and one of the students decides to look into the death of Thalia, who is the person who she knew from all these years ago, and whether or not the wrong person was convicted. This completely turns her life upside down. Her life is also a very busy, chaotic thing, as you come to find out while reading this book. And as somebody who watches way too much true crime content, this was right up my alley. Also, throughout this book, she is addressing somebody and you don't initially know who it is, but it's definitely somebody who could have had a hand in the murder. This gets complex and interesting, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. On to my 5-star reads, the first one being a reread for me that I actually reread every year in July, and that's Me and White Supremacy. This started out as a 28-day Instagram challenge and then was developed into this book, and it's something I reread every year to make sure that I am forwarding the work of anti-racism, at least in myself. It's also a really good primer on the subject and a really good reminder of different things that I should be aware of as I walk through my day-to-day life. As I've talked about this book about 4 times previously, I'm not going to go on about it, but I do highly recommend it if you haven't read it before and you're looking for something on this subject. The penultimate book on this list is Finding Me by Viola Davis. This is her memoir. It is incredibly powerful, it is fantastic, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. She has had a very rich and storied and interesting and traumatic life, so know that going into it. If you're somebody who requires trigger warnings, I do have some resources down below where you can look those up, because there's definitely different types of abuse that happen in this, as well as sudden death of at least 2 animals, which is something that I know people need to know. However, I'm always hesitant to give trigger warnings because I'm always going to miss something and I don't want to do that to you, so look down below at the very bottom of my description. There's a couple of different places you can find trigger warnings. Viola Davis is an actress I didn't really know about until How to Get Away with Murder, which is basically at the end of this, so it's so interesting to go back to see what her family life and growing up and all of these different roles I didn't know about, and then to finally get to this role that I actually know her for, and to know that some of the things that I particularly remember enjoying about that character, she made sure they were a part of that character, and that's just endlessly fascinating to me. If you enjoy celebrity memoirs, definitely pick this one up. Finally, the last book on this list and the book that I enjoyed the most this month is Imogen, obviously, by Becky Albertalli. This is such a love letter to bisexual people who take a little bit longer to realize that they're queer, which not only is something near and dear to the author, it's also near and dear to me. In this book, Imogen is going to visit her best friend who is away at university. The university isn't even that far away. In fact, she is going to be attending that university in 5 months after she graduates, but she hasn't actually been there yet. Her friend also came out as queer over the summer, so she's fallen into this group of queer friends, and there's only one little problem about that, which is that since her friend had never dated somebody of the same gender before, she kind of lied and said that she had, and that the person that she dated was Imogen. This is something Imogen has no idea about until she gets there, realizes her friend has told this lie, and is like, no, I can go along with that, that's fine. And then this not only colors what the friends think of her, but also gets her thinking about some things, and it goes from there. I connected with this book so very deeply. It hit me in so many places as a person who is bi, but also a person who is demi and sort of on the ace spectrum. And just having a book out there that lets you know it is okay if you don't know you're queer immediately out of the womb, because that is the story of a lot of people, and there's no one queer narrative. If you want to hear me talk more about these books or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these or want to read any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or smiley face if you're on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!